ArtSpark Texas is a nonprofit arts organization. We challenge perceptions of how people contribute by creating an arts-inspired, inclusive community of individuals with diverse abilities. Our veteran program started in 2009, and we have opportunities for all creative types, including musicians, dancers, visual artists. You can find out more information at our website, which is artsparktx.org. I'm April Sullivan. I'm the Artworks Director. Also, one of the other organizer on here is Celia Hughes, our Executive Director, waving to us. We want to thank our funders for our veteran program. That includes the Christopher and Dana Reeve Foundation, the Texas Commission on the Arts, and the National Endowment for the Arts, Creative Forces. We want to thank Lancer Legacy Ranch for offering to host this event, which was originally planned to be at their ranch in Maud, Texas, near Texarkana. And we also want to thank Chris Dacey of the Wounded Warrior Project for partnering with us on inviting participants. So I know a lot of people came through Chris of the Wounded Warrior Project. So for our first presentation, that's going to be Thomas Morrissey. He's actually the reason we're doing this whole thing. Thomas attended our writers conference that we hosted in Austin as part of the Austin Veteran Arts Festival last fall, November. And he wanted to bring something similar to his area of Texas, or he's actually in Arkansas, actually in Rhode Island right now. His dedication to the project is what brought us all together today. So thank you, Tom, for making this happen.
I appreciate it. Thank you. Yeah. But it's mostly your guys' tenacity to stick with it.
I know we've been through some changes on the date and on the location, but we finally got it. A little bit of background on Thomas. Thomas is a U.S. Army helicopter pilot with the 117th Assault Helicopter Company, Vietnam, 1970 to 71. He graduated with an MFA from the Herberger Institute of School of Fine Art at Arizona State University. He recently retired as Professor Emeritus from the Community College of Rhode Island and now lives in Texarkana, where he's an adjunct professor of speech and communications and art at Texas A&M University Texarkana campus. He is the author and photographer of Between the Lines, photographs from the National Vietnam Veterans Memorial. He's president of the VHPA, Vietnam Helicopter Pilots Association Authors Chapter. He's currently working on an autobiographical novel and fictional work based on his life story, centered on his year as a combat helicopter pilot in Vietnam. So for this topic, we've all been there, done that, now what? Selecting the point of departure necessary for reaching the objective is the next governing step. The act of defining the context in which we will proceed, knowing where we're headed and why. Beyond an idea, the point of departure includes audience identification, shaping the narrative into something others will want shared, being flexible, and finally knowing when we're done and the objective is reached. This workshop offers a flexible framework participants can apply to creative writing and other creative endeavors.
My presentation, as it was billed, is called Putting Action into Words. The reason why I did that title is I kind of like puns and things like that, and everybody's always talking about putting your words into action. You know, people say that all the time to people. So in our case, we've already done the action, and now we need to articulate the action that we've done. But not only that, one of the things that we have to consider is if we do this, and I'm kind of looking at my lecture notes that I have scribbled out here, that we want to do it in a way that someone else might be interested in hearing. So what I like to ask, you know, when I do a talk is, how did I get here? You know, here I am. People see you, and they see you the way they see you now, but people don't have really an understanding of where you came from and how you got there. So in this piece today, I've taken used the analogy of a cow, and saying that my whole life experience is essentially a cow. And just quickly, I'll point out, this is a discussion for another day, but like most kids, I was raised on the circus. My mother rode horses and elephants, and I was raised with clowns. And when I got back from the war, The economy was horrible, and the only job I could find as a combat veteran helicopter pilot was running the BB gun machine gun stand at Magic Mountain Amusement Park in California. So kind of a funny twist to my life with that. And then the next thing I always like to just let people know is that I disavow any relationship to the Beatles breaking up. I left for Vietnam one day. Paul McCartney broke the group up the next day. And so I just like to point out that I'm not responsible for the Beatles breaking up. And if anybody didn't get it, this is my futile attempt at humor before we get started here. This is a helicopter from our unit. And we had 3 flight platoons. The Sidewinders were our gun platoon, and we had the Pink Panthers in the 2nd platoon, and Little Annie Fanny was our 1st flight platoon. And we got in trouble over there in Vietnam some for having this picture on our nose cone. But when we went into the field to pull troops out of hot LZs, they were glad to see her. And so that's enough of that. But I like to point out that throughout life, you know, we become many different people. And so here's just 4 different shots of me at different points in my life. One with General Westmoreland when I was part of something called the Vietnam Veterans Institute, which was headquartered in Washington. And then the top right picture is me making pottery in Brazil. I was my MFA is in ceramics, and I had worked with the international volunteer organizations in rural villages in South America with ceramists, helping them build kilns and stuff like that. And in the 1980s, the computer came out, so that's me with one of my sculptures on the wall, and my trusty Amiga 500 computer, and then me with my harmonica in my Neil Young phase, I like to call it. Some of my pottery I made, and I like to say that, you know, I try to, anything I try to do as best I can, and so I actually became a pretty good potter. But realized early on that that really wasn't how I wanted to spend my life. I did sculpture in graduate school, and someone could say that the war had some influence on my artwork. I built sculptures and actually torched them and burnt them to the ground as part of the performance installation. And I also did these piles of extruded pipes. Were all pit fire. This was about 8 feet tall and about 16 or 18 feet across. And if you've ever seen pictures from Vietnam and you saw all the piles of rubble or the piles of used 105 rounds at fire support bases or something, you might be able to catch some influence there. But I never really claimed the war as an influence. And, you know, Peter Volkas, if anybody's not familiar with him, you might want to look him up. He was a ceramic artist. He's the first person who ever elevated ceramics out of the craft realm and into the realm of fine arts. And he was a tail gunner in a bomber in World War II. And after his death, a bunch of people started doing analysis of his work and coming up with all these, I don't know, suggestions that his sculpture was all done in the pain of the war and all this kind of stuff. But I knew him, I met him. I was fortunate to be in the exhibits that he was sure of. And I don't think that's the case at all, but that's again for another day. But people try to extrapolate. As soon as they find out you're a veteran, they try to extrapolate all kinds of secret code in your work that may or may not be there. But again, that's just my thought. And these were early pieces from like around 1990. This was the one at the bottom were digital video that I produced using Amiga computers and from just stealing some images from various movies like Platoon or whatever that may have been out at the time. So in the 80s, mid 80s, I started a company because I was a college professor and I had the opportunity to do research, and I wanted to go and work more internationally, because it occurred to me that Rhode Island, being a very small state, wasn't a very good goal, and that there was just too much competition here, and vicious competition among artists, I might say. So I decided to just increase the size of my bullseye and make the whole globe my target. And I formed this little company, and I did work with nonprofit organizations and non-governmental organizations for about 10 years, and worked with Plan International in Thailand and Jakarta and places, and for the World Health Organization and other places like that. Great opportunity to work on my artwork as a visual artist, and also as a human in general, I guess. A couple of images, one from Guatemala and one from Brazil. And being of the entrepreneurial spirit, I started organizing academic trips around the different countries. This is from Cuba. I went to Cuba several times on educational visas. And again, wanting to be able to do things, but not really having the money to do it on my own, always led me to various ways to find funding to put things together to make projects happen. And I kind of owe that back to, I guess, being raised on the circus and learning that the show must go on no matter what. Nobody ever called in sick. If it was pouring down rain, you still put the tent up or took it down or whatever you did. And then the same thing is true for us veterans. I've never heard the enemy say, gee, it's a little hot out today. Why don't we put this off till tomorrow? And so, I mean, that's us. We're veterans. We're tenacious, and we don't usually readily accept no for an answer. Our problem is sometimes, though, is that we have a hard time figuring out the path that we're going to take to accomplish something. And that's what I'm trying to do with this workshop today, is offer one path in the writing venue as to how we might be able to package something and accomplish a goal, if that's our goal. And the fact that we're here doing a writing workshop, I think, would indicate that that, in fact, is our goal. That's the cover of my book. Syracuse University Press published it. I was very excited to get an Ivy League university to publish my book. But later on, I was discouraged because being an academic publisher, they're more interested in the academic purity of the project than they were in the capitalistic model of selling the book. And I had publicists who offered to get me on things like Good Morning America and stuff, and the publisher just didn't want to bother themselves with that. And so it was never the success that I think it could have been, but it was still very nice. This is a photograph from an installation of my show at Longwood, I believe it is, outside of Houston University there. And there's a picture of my sculpture that's in Vietnam on this also, that I'll show a better shot of in a minute. Here it is here. This is, I got invited to an international sculpture symposium in Hue, Vietnam, and got there one day, had no idea what to expect, and they had all these huge marble rocks about the size of a Jeep Cherokee for people to carve up, and it was really remarkable for me, because having lived in this country and taken sculpture classes, if anybody has ever taken a sculpture class and you went to the bookstore to buy a piece of marble, it's more like the size of a shoebox, not the size of a minivan. And so having that giant chunk of rock to work with opened up all kinds of issues. Somebody from the Vietnam Helicopter Pilot Association went to Vietnam this year, and they sent me a picture of it, and it's still standing there. So it's withstood a couple floods and some bad weather. And then we're getting close to the writing, folks, so don't panic. But I just want to show again who I am. I do a lot of mixed media photography, as well as painting and sculpture, a lot of found art kind of stuff. And the picture on the top left, while it looks very abstract, is actually, this is a series of paintings that were based on stock trading charts, using the candlestick charts and tracking the stock market during the 1990s. And so Again, it's finding a subject that you're interested in and figuring out a way to express that. Essentially, this is where I started transitioning my book between the lines into more of an essay, because I started thinking more and more about what the people whom I had photographed, what might be going on through their minds, and the objects I photographed there, what was going on in people's minds when they saw this, what they were experiencing at the Vietnam Memorial. Um, and So I started this series of images called Wounded Memories. And these are digital montages that are based on photographs that I took at the memorial and then collaged in with other things. The lady in the photograph on the right is a Gold Star mother, and she was there, um, laying some flowers by her son's name. And so this narrative, that I developed from that, from being there, kind of like started with this image, created this image. So the cow. So if I look at everything that I've shown you here, all the aspects of my life that have created whatever I am today, I'm just using the analogy of just say, well, let's just call it a cow. And if it is a cow and we're talking about using our life, if our life is, if I can use the analogy of the cow and talk about my life as this, how do I cut it up? How do I make it into something that's functional that I can use, that I can draw from? And so the first thing I thought of is that, well, I found this meat chart, and I said, well, like this is how people cut up meat. So depending on what you're trying to do with your life, you can go into it and make a chuck roast or a rib or sirloins or flank steaks, whatever you can create out of it. But one thing, and Matt and Elizabeth both will kind of address these issues, I think. But when you are cutting that cow up, there's going to be a lot of gore that comes out. There's going to be blood and guts. And um, Michael the other day told me not to cry over spilt milk, but there is spilt milk. There is a story there that you can milk, no pun intended. But yeah, you have to be ready to deal with the gore, because you may bring out some uncomfortable memories, some things that are difficult. So it's not all just finding steaks in there. There's going to be other stuff that you come across that you dig out. And again, there's even more ways to cut it up. And so you can think, and the thing is too, is that I believe that there are ways to cut beef up that people haven't come across yet too. So, I mean, you can just be the one who discovers a new way to slice that cow, so to speak, in a way that's going to work for you. And then, again, it depends on what you want to do with it. There's thousands of ways to prepare beef, right, from the cow, or milk, make cheese, make ice cream, whatever. So how you cut it up, do you want to make a prime piece of meat out of it, or more of a hamburger? Where are you going with this? When you cut it up, what are you going to be doing with it? And so with that analogy, I'm talking about how we can take our life, put it in a context, and then extrapolate information from our life in that context, and we create, even this cup of soup here that somebody could make. So I hope the analogy makes sense to you, because I thought it was pretty innovative little analogy to make. We have this our life story, and I've often explained my life to people as being a series of seemingly unrelated events, that the only thing they all have in common is that they all happen to me. And so how do I tie those together? How do I make them into something meaningful? And the way I do that is going to be how I live my life, how I succeed or don't succeed, how I become someone who's going to finish things, start things and finish things, or how I bounce from thing to thing, which is my life story pretty much. But fortunately, I'm able to focus on things long enough to kind of bring them to a close. And we all have our baggage that we deal with. I promised myself I wouldn't get into politics today, but the social unrest that's going on in our country right now is evidence to that. And how we deal with that is what makes us who we are, and we can allow it to defeat us, or we can turn it into a strength. And that's again, going back to cutting up that cow. How we deal with it, and when we cut it open and we come across the grime and the dirt and the nasty parts of it, that we don't let them stop us, that we continue to march, so to speak. And being a Vietnam veteran, I can promise you that we were not welcomed home with open arms. But that's I'll talk about that a little bit more in my second piece. So I'm just going to close it with this plug for my latest endeavor, which is a nonprofit called I Build Guitars. And I'm working with Stuart McDonald and a couple other companies that supply materials for luthiers, for guitar builders, to build instruments with. And I'll be doing a workshop with Matt at Lancer Legacy Ranch as soon as we're allowed to be within 6 feet of one another. This has been scheduled and dropped back and dropped back and dropped back so many times. It's I don't even know if it's on the back burner anymore. I think it may have gone back in the freezer. But what we do is we have a website. It's called ibuildguitars.org, and we get damaged parts. We get the companies that have that manufacture the materials that people like Gibson or Fender or Martin use to build their instruments, but we get the blemishes. We get the stuff from them that's not marketable, that they can't use. And I like the analogy of the veterans, that we're being these damaged parts, and we're putting ourselves back together into something that's very workable and usable. And so how we deal with those broken parts is an important factor in us succeeding. I'm also a 100% believer in veterans helping veterans, and that's why I really think it's great that April and the Art Spark have and Celeste have allowed us to, the veterans, to be the drivers of this workshop. So just in closing on this, the guitar on the left is one I made out of an ammo box, and oddly enough, it's called the ammo box guitar. It's a heavy metal instrument and does not have a volume control on it. And when people ask me why, I say, well, why would you want to turn it down, is my answer to that question. And then the one on the left is an instrument of mine, was fortunate enough to be on the cover of Guitar Maker magazine back in 2015. And again, you can see that I'm kind of using my painting skills to decorate the body of the guitar. This is not a history report, okay? We need to separate ourselves from our preconceived notions of what things should be, and we need to enjoy doodling, scribbling, all that kind of stuff. And I showed my art appreciation class last year a couple slides of some real scribbly sketches, which were the initial drawings for the design of the Guggenheim in Barcelona. And my students actually got mad because they just said those are like horrible. There's nothing there. That's just a scribble. And I'm trying to explain to them that that's how ideas evolve, especially visual ideas. They you have to start putting them on paper. You have to get them out of your mind and onto the paper. And the same thing with writing. You have to get it out of your mind and onto the paper. And then another thing I hear a lot of times is people talk about, like art just makes me so happy and I'm just so happy to do it and all this kind of stuff. I have been hard pressed really throughout my career to hear any artists speaking to Peter Volkas or anybody that I can think of who have not been somehow psychologically tortured. Picasso, Van Gogh, Frida, Calhoun. I mean, they're all everybody's got these inner devils, that they're trying to work out. So if your artwork doesn't bring you great joy, I'd say not to worry about it, because you're going to find a bunch of company by doing that. And then the other thing is talk about stealing style. As an artist, again, I've always learned that everything's pretty much already been done. It's hard to find something that's never been done, but when you do it, you need to be doing it differently. So you're not aping someone's style. You're not just copying someone. I mean, the amount of people out there today that can successfully make a copy of a Picasso painting, or bands that can play Pink Floyd song perfectly to the note. There's really no shortage of people with those skills. The shortage comes from the fact that, the people in Pink Floyd thought the song up, that they could hear it in their head first and were able to extrapolate it into the real world, that Picasso could see in his mind what he did. And writers have to do that same thing. So like I said, you need to learn you need to like words. You need to enjoy playing with words. And if you don't enjoy words and you don't like playing with words, you either need to develop a knack for enjoying that, or think of a different medium perhaps, because we're talking about using words here, and so how do we start to find those words? So I like to, again, I mentioned Clement Greenberg earlier, and Clement Greenberg here said, where the old masters created an illusion of space into which one could imagine walking, the illusion created by modernists is one to which one can look at and travel through, if only with the eye. And he says here also that the superior artist is one who knows how to be influenced. And I think that's an interesting thing. And I kind of misquoted it a little bit in my first presentation, because we can't help but be influenced. It's how we deal with the influences that count. And again, going back to people I know who are artists who say, well, I don't go to show exhibits, or I don't read art magazines because I don't want to be influenced. Well, they're essentially just reinventing the wheel all the time, and you need to know what's going on. So if you are wanting to write, I recommend reading as well, because reading is an important way to understand writing. And he used the term eschewing the dictums, which I really like. In fact, I named one of my sculptures that, because what he's talking about is just breaking all the rules, not to let the rules master you, and to not be tied down with them. So I'd like to also mention that I don't think you even need a storyline, because once you get started writing, your storyline very well may appear. And again, with my photography book, that was the case. Like I said, I was working on it for a couple of years before I started realizing that it was a project. It wasn't just me going down to the memorial and taking pictures, which it started out as. But after I was there the first time, I realized I needed to come back. And after about the third or fourth time of being there, I started seeing that, wow, this is a project that's worth doing. And somewhere in my notes here, I wrote it down, but I can't remember where, so I'll mention it now. But the project just kind of like, there was a point where I realized that I needed to do this. And then I started looking for people who shared my idea, who thought that this was a good project to do. And no word to lie, I pounded the pavement for about 10 years, going to conferences and going to New York and going to Boston and going to Prentice Hall and going to all these different publishers, sending out proposals, only to be turned down over and over and over again. So you have to have the tenacity not to be discouraged. And finally, at a popular culture conference, actually in Las Vegas, I met the people from the Syracuse University Press, who they had a booth there selling books, and they looked at my work and they said, wow, this would fit perfectly into this series that we're working on about American culture or something to that effect, and they published it. So it's just kind of serendipitous in a way, but again, I believe that the Lord is in charge, and that if it wasn't for God's influence, I surely wouldn't even survive the war, because I really can't chalk it off to my expertise as a pilot. I can only chalk it off to just bullets missing my helicopter for some reason and missing me. If you think of a journey too, first you have to think of your point of departure, and that's where this photograph comes in. We're using the photograph as our point of departure because it's our stimulus to start our idea. So it's that piece of meat that we extracted, that we picked up at the supermarket or cut out of our cow, so to speak, that we're going to start to work with. And then if we think of it as a journey or as a trip, you need to really know where you're started, but you also have to have some general idea of where you're headed, but not necessarily. I mean, that's what Jack Kerouac's On the Road kind of was all about. They're just out there driving around with no pure goal or destination. The destination will present itself. That thing about when the student is ready, the master will be there. And so you'll see the road, and you'll know which way to go. But getting started is the most important thing. So some things that you can start on, photograph, like I said, but what kind of stuff have you collected? Do you have a old bush hat that brings back some ideas, decorations, letters, photographs that you have? If you don't have any photographs, go online and find something that is of interest to you. And for the purposes of this workshop, that's what I did. I didn't even work from one of my own photographs, but I worked from one I found online because it kind of like gave me some inspiration for some reason or another. But go to the library. And again, we're not talking about writing a history book here, at least I'm not. I'm talking about writing fiction, writing a novel. And at one of the writers' conferences I went through the Vietnam Veterans of America, and I can't remember who it was specifically, but it was one of the authors, back in the early 80s, who read this passage. And then, at the end of the passage, he said, this is pure fiction, but what a better way to describe the Vietnam War. And I'm sure that all the wars in the Mideast kind of have that same flavor, as a fictional narrative, because the whole thing was so surrealistic to begin with, that if you're not writing a history book, then the road is kind of open to what you do. So is there a smell, juxtaposition of things, even a song that might open that door? And once you find that, once you are doing that, then you have your point of departure, which is where you need to start your trip from. So I'm slicing up my cow, like I said, using photographs, and that's the point of departure I have down. And then a bit of research, okay, because you might want to, you don't want to start writing about something that you absolutely know nothing about, although people do that all the time. But it's going to be a combination of that photograph that sets off your point of departure, as well as your knowledge of the subject, and then your ability to fill in the blanks that you are missing. So when I write about a Huey helicopter, I go online or I go look. I have my old flight manuals from flight school, because I don't remember the exact diameter of the rotor blades. I don't remember the horsepower. I don't remember the RPM of the rotor blades. I don't remember a lot of specific details, but that will add authenticity to my story. So we want to be able to do research to find out specific details so our story fills in with the things that we don't have from memory. And then keep in mind that as you go on this trip, on this narrative, you're going to find detours. Bridge is going to be out somewhere. You're going to have to, sleep overnight somewhere. You get sidetracked. So, the whole thing is basically a trip, going through an experience. And like I said, I use the photography as my impetus. So what I started doing back in the 80s is I got involved with the National Corporation for Service, which was part of the Vista AmeriCorps program, and doing a lot of service learning projects with my students, and actually doing trainings for Vista AmeriCorps at workshops for other people from other universities. And I actually became a service learning mentor for a while through the American Association of Community Colleges. And I set up a project with my students because they were photography students. My students weren't, English majors, but they were art majors doing photography. And we went to middle schools and high schools with disposable cameras back before digital photography was around. And we would give these kids the cameras with an assignment, like to photograph some points of interest, things that catch their eye on the way to and from school, for example. Or one of the projects was, a family tradition, like a Sunday evening meal or pizza every Friday, or something that they did that was of importance to them, goals that they might have. And once they took a picture like this, the assignment was for them to find that 1,000 words that the picture, we are told, represents. And it's funny because an individual with their doctorate in hand reprimanded me one time at one of these America Reads workshop, because he said that I was not teaching the students to read, but I was teaching them how to write. And I had a hard time separating the two, quite honestly, because reading and writing kind of go hand in hand, And but anyway, I and this is just a little aside, but I think it's funny. I mentioned that well, actually, I saw art as being the fourth R, in reading, writing, and arithmetic. And this person pointed out to me that, well, art doesn't begin with the R either, and not that arithmetic does, or writing, but I guess that's a story for another day too. But anyway, what I'm saying is that this works. If you take a picture and you start to reminisce on it, the first things you'll know is you'll remember the names of who's in the picture, if there are people in the picture, the name, the place where you took the picture, when you took the picture, where you were when you took the picture. You were standing on the hill looking down, or in the valley looking up. People were on the balcony, you were on the balcony. And then why? Why did you even take the picture in the first place? And why were the people or the things in the picture there in the first place? So these are just kind of like the immediate, like 4 or 5 kind of questions that I can ask myself about a photograph. And then I go into a whole list of stuff. And here's a picture. This was actually my helicopter, but I got grounded the night of this mission. It's the Firefly Mission. We used to hover along the Ho Chi Minh Trail and try to get shot at, which is a fun activity if you ask anybody who did it. And I got grounded, and they sent out another crew that night, and they got shot down. And the next day, the Chinook sling loaded the aircraft back. So again, like I said, I can't really, I can only thank God for that event happening at that time. The crew survived. There were no KIAs in the event, but still, it's just it's how serendipitous life is. So I see this picture. I mean, there's a whole book basically I could get from talking about what led up to and what came after, what was in the aftermath of just this one image, what it implies, what we can deduce, what we can imagine from this photograph, what might be going on in people's minds. You see the 2 people, 3 people down at the bottom of the picture observing this helicopter being sling loaded in. The individual stories, the history behind the people in the picture, the people in the event, the history of the event itself, the future. And they mentioned early on that my current project, I'm 71 and I was in Vietnam in 71. So my book that I've just about got done now is called Looking Back at 71 from 71. And 1971 in Vietnam is the hub of the wheel from which this story emits. And I'm going back in time from 1971, and I'm coming forward in time from 1971. But 1971 in Vietnam is the point of departure for my story. And then, is there a moral to the story, to this photograph? Is there something to be learned? But then what happens if we juxtapose that picture and this picture together? This is a picture I took of my 2 friends, McNew and Hamilton, after crashing that helicopter the night before. They're in the 2nd Field Forces Hospital. So again, now I got 2 pictures, and what can this imply? What can we deduce? And all that kind of stuff. So it just cascades, where you can go with an image like this. This is an article from the Hawk magazine, which 1st Aviation Brigade published in Vietnam. And this is my unit. We were a special missions company, and our call sign was Warlords. And the aircraft up on the upper right, they are hovering, is my helicopter. And so they wrote a little bit about us, and it was kind of neat to come across this magazine article. And there I am, a bright young lad with my door gunner. That's our trusty minigun. Here is a Chu Hoi pamphlet. We used to throw these out to tell the enemy that it's not too late for them to surrender. The piece on the bottom left is a picture from a manual on how to fly my mission. That was my helicopter with the floodlight on, and then the gunships were to either side. And this is one of our gunships up in the upper right-hand corner that actually didn't make it back in one piece. And at the bottom is what they call a short timers calendar, which all the veterans, I'm sure, that are here today are familiar with. Just some other little snapshots of, that talking about how to develop a story. Here's myself and a couple of my friends comparing camera lenses, doing a combat assault in a village, and then the Bob Hope show. So I mean, here's another 4,000 to 5,000 words that you can steal from those. But here's the image that I'm working with today, and I call it POL. POL being the acronym for petroleum, oil, and lubricants. And this is, we would hot refuel the aircraft without shutting it down. We would go to the fuel dump, and crew chief or door gunner would jump out and put the fuel in there. You notice he doesn't have a glove on. That was very typical, to take the glove off, because there was nothing like lighting up your cigarette with your Zippo lighter when your glove was saturated with JP4 jet fuel. So to avoid that happening, guys usually took the gloves off when they refueled the aircraft. One of my friends, who was a fellow pilot, just in our Facebook page that our unit has, just put up a post the other day talking about how he got grounded for his door gunner refueling without a glove on. So toward the end of the war, as I'm sure we're all familiar with, sometimes nitpickiness starts to take over, and people start walking around. The rear echelon seems to think that they know more about fighting the war than we do. So what our assignment is today is to take a picture. It doesn't even have to be a good one. Doesn't even have to be in focus. If you don't have a picture, just do what I did. Go online, find a picture of something that you're interested in, and use it. But I'm sure we all have a picture around. And then think about it. Is it posed? Is it not posed? Is it sharp and focused, or is it blurred? I have a lot of pictures that were blurred because I took them from the front seat of the aircraft while we were flying. And so the fact that they're blurred actually adds more to the story. I think, is the picture backlit? If it is, why does that happen? Is a good detail? Are there things that you wish you could see that aren't there, right? And that's an important element in any picture. As a photographer, we were always taught that it's what's not in the picture sometimes that's more important than what's actually in the picture. So is there stuff there that was to the left or the right that you wish were in the picture that aren't? What led up to taking that picture? And then what happened after you took that picture? And if it's a event, you know, what was that about? And what about the picture that you never took? Can you see it in your mind? So again, if you start to using this outline, you can go through an image, and then once you go through it, you know, do it again, go through it again. And I always tell my writing students, and that I teach public speaking actually, but when you're writing your presentation, if you just start off, if it's going to be a 10 paragraph or 10 page presentation, if you start off with 10 words, then those 10 words can grow into 10 sentences, and then those 10 sentences can grow into 10 paragraphs, and those 10 paragraphs can grow into 10 pages. And if you use that format, you can get a lot done. So I hope that this has been helpful to you. I like the Bob Dylan comment that I live by, and that's take what you need and leave the rest. So if something I said might work for you, that's great. If it doesn't work for you, well then, you know, just don't bother with it. And remember Clement Greenberg, my favorite art critic. Actually, just quick aside, Clement Greenberg only got his bachelor's degree. However, he's the most quoted art critic from the 50s and the 60s by everybody working on their PhDs. So it's funny that he wouldn't be credentialed enough to teach in a university, but they quote him all the time. But he said here, and it's my favorite quote of all times, all profoundly original art looks ugly at first. So if you get negative feedback, don't worry about it in the slightest. And that concludes part 2, folks. I hope it's working for you. Thank you very much. Okay, so here we are, part 3. And again, I want to thank Art Spark Texas, as well as Lancer Legacy Ranch for getting this done. As was mentioned earlier, we were originally going to do this at the ranch, but because of the coronavirus and the pandemic and social distancing, we're doing it completely online, which actually I think turned out to be better because we were able to reach more people. So that's really great. So some of the things I recommend is finding a proofreader and someone who can discuss grammar with you as well. But I put in here that, you know, I don't know about now, but in Vietnam, they used to say, don't mean nothing. And the person who's proofreading your piece might tell you, well, that's not correct English, you know, but it don't mean nothing, you know, that's the way we say it. That's what we're trying to say. So proofreading, whoever's doing your proofreading has to know what you're saying, what you're talking about too. They have to have a knowledge of the subject as well. And you have to be careful because people who proofread sometimes just want to write your book over again. They want to change everything. So you got to keep away from that. But you really need to bounce your ideas off of people. I teach, like I said, communication at Texas A&M, and part of what my students are required to do is to run their speech by friends, family, and people that are not friends and family, because they need to get objective viewpoints on, you know, what they're doing, and if it's organized, if it's understandable, all this kind of stuff. So spell check is great. Write or even dictate now. A lot of times I'll be in my car and an idea will come to me, and I'll just turn my phone on and talk about it to my phone. so I don't forget it later. I worry about spelling later. I worry about punctuation later. And I really worry about sentence structure later, because the initial thing I'm trying to do is just capture the idea and get it out of my head and into the real world, so to speak. So if you need historical details, again, like I said, look it up. And if you're not good at looking up stuff, maybe you can find someone else that help look up stuff for you as well. And spell check, while I use it all the time, I have to. I'm the world's worst speller. I always tell people I was absent for 2 classes in elementary school. One was handwriting and one was spelling. But yeah, spell check, you need to spell check your spell check, because what happens to me is I'm a hunt and peck 2-finger typer like my dad was. And what happens is I will type FRO instead of FOR all the time, and the spell check doesn't catch it because fro's a word. So, you have to proofread, you have to, read through everything again. And if you do have an editor and they're great and you really like them, send me their name. It's just a lot of text on here, but create work that lingers, right? You want to be able to use word pictures, they call them. Some of the things that people talk about are, emotional word bombs, bombshells, surprises, interruptions, cliffhangers, all this kind of stuff. But this right here, this slide, and the reason why I'm kind of stumbling over it, as you see at the bottom, it said, this is just a book report. I could kind of made a promise to myself that I would not make a book report, and I'm looking at my notes, and I meant to say that earlier. But this is, you read, you go to workshops and you learn stuff like this. My point is that you learn from it what you can and what you don't need that you don't use. But this is like the book report segment of my presentation. So poll. So what else can we tell from this photograph? Okay, I want to know who took the picture. I want to know why they took the pictures. What about the clothing they were wearing? I already told you a little bit about the glove detail. And so what else? What other backstories can we extrapolate from this photograph? So what I did is I sat down and I started working with this picture, and I made up a story based on what I could tell from this photograph, as well as my experience as a helicopter pilot in Vietnam. And so I have about a 1,600 word little essay that I wrote from it, which I'm not going to try to read entirely because we surely don't have time to do that. But basically what I did is I picked this up saying it's been a long morning and it's going to be an even longer day. I named the guy here in the picture, Johnson. He's the crew chief, handling pole, refueling our aircraft. I call it a hungry bird. While I took a well-deserved piss break, and then I put in parentheses like I had anything left to piss after what we had just gone through. Mac the Knife, a lanky black kid from Georgia who had quit junior college after breaking up with his high school sweetheart, the door gunner, was off scrounging whatever there was to get. My Peter pilot, W01 Roberts, 3 weeks in country, a 20-year-old from around Chicago, held down the fort and waited for our next mission. So I kind of like build a sense of the place of the characters in my story here. And this little piece that I wrote could be one of the chapters in my book. It could be a short story that stands alone on its own. I go on that I reported to the TOC for the sit reps and WTNs and WTFs. And then I mentioned earlier that you might want to have a glossary of terms or something in your book to say what that means. TOC is the tactical operations center. Sit rep means situation reports. WTNs, we just ask those all the time, where to next. And WTF, which is not really an official acronym, but the what the fucks. And what our next mission was, going over into Cambodia, which we call the Bode, after which we would be free to eat a quick lunch of pork and bean or pork with scalloped potato sea rations warmed over C4 before saddling back up for the afternoon's resupplies, medical evacuations, etc. So as I pointed out to you earlier, the unit that I was in, we did a mishmash of stuff, and this just kind of like paints that portrait of what all we were doing. We were going to get the, I walked back to the ship with a list of new frequencies and call signs in hands. These would be scribbled onto the windshield with grease pencil temporarily, despite regulations. There's a typo right there, hat instead of that. Suggested this was not the best practice. So again, pointing out the problem with spell check, because hat's also spelled correct, but it's not what was intended. I go off on a little side here about medevacs, not the most popular agenda item on any given day, but a necessary chore assigned to an ash and trash special missions unit like the 117. I kind of like this next couple sentences, because it wasn't the wounded we dreaded, but the body bags. These were guys just like us only a few minutes ago, now stacked like so many potatoes on the steel floor of our UH-1. So again, I kind of like that idea here, that here I am flying these body bags around, but just a few minutes ago, these were actually people. They weren't, they just became body bags. We wrote taxi and tour on the nose cone of our helicopter one time. Because we were flying into Cambodia, we had covered over the tail numbers and stuff on our helicopter to make it more anonymous. I go into talking about Johnson. So I hope you're reading this, because I'm not reading it for verbatim, but how he had just about burnt out the barrel of his 60 during the morning's encounter, that we were being surprised by a surprising number of enemy troops around the LZ. And I talk about how fire support bases were good spots to sling in helicopter support like fuel and ammo. Flying cranes and shoot hooks, we call them CH-47s, would drop off these coveted supplies only hours before an operation begun, in hopes of keeping Charlie guessing. We were surely getting ready to load up with our share of the goods and then some. Johnson had also scored 2 extra boxes of ammo. The war we had just left was only a few hundred meters away, yet it seemed so distant so far. The screaming turbines waited for the next lift. The thunder of outgoing rounds from the battery of 105s provided the almost needed punctuation, adding a melodic rhythm to the deafening sounds around us. Better than this than the crackless alarms fire or mortar rounds. But anyway, so I'm building the story based on that one photograph and the scene and what's going on around the scene, what's going around us, based on my own personal experience of the war. And again, I have to have that personal experience, and if I don't have it myself, I need to research it. I need to find out what all is going to be happening. And then I get in, I talk a little bit about the LOH, the Loach, that the colonel was using for a CNC. And they used to say that the Loach, the little tiny Hughes aircraft, was that the pilot actually strapped them on rather than got into them, because they were so small and maneuverable. They used to be able to fly down between layers of cover underneath the tall trees and between the tall trees and the shorter trees. And so I have the name here of the fictitious colonel who's in this CNC ship, named Colonel Fortin, and I've nicknamed, given a nickname to the fact that we in this story called him Colonel Fortin's Follies, the nickname that would be given to the missions that he was in charge of. So going along, I talk about how the pilot was sucking on a cigarette, drinking down a hot can of Coke, while that were being passed out to guys who did not care all that much about preserving those lily whites out in the field. Fuck it, they would say, probably lose them all before we are out of this anyway. Toothbrushing was not a high priority on the survival list. So what I'm talking about here is how we were eating food, drinking Coca-Cola, and ruining our teeth because we weren't brushing after every meal. I get into talking about Johnson a little bit, married with 2 kids back in the world, was even more stressed that day as he was short for his R&R. Being short means you're ready to go leave in Hawaii, and his wife and kids were there to meet him in a week. So he said, let's don't fuck this one up, as he yelled to me over the hot mic intercom for the whole crew to hear. 5 days in a wake up, his hormones were pumping strong, and his superstitions were as well. He had never been one to wear his flak jacket or a chicken plate, as it was known, but he was taking no chances this week. So obviously he had his chicken plate on, and if you remember back to the first photograph, he indeed had his flak vest on. I get into commenting about what intelligence we had that day and how the intelligence was probably lacking, and talk about the first salvo of mortars that landed in the LZ, and in the last sentence of that first paragraph, missed the LZ and actually were off the mark a little bit and hit the tree line and actually made the LZ a little bit bigger for us. So I begin the next paragraph saying, thanks, Chuck. The first flight got out unscathed and probably hadn't even fired a single round. Not only had Charles been a little off on his calculations for distance, his timing was off as well. The shells exploded seconds after the first flight had lifted off. A pair of fast movers, those are what we call the jets, had screamed past ahead of us as we lined up for our approach, and with a barrage of incendiary rockets put a stop to that in one fell swoop. And I'll just mention that I mentioned the timing here. What the VC used to like to do is they would fire and right at the end of the first flight landing and cause the LZ to be non-functional by hitting one of the helicopters that were already landed, and then they were able to start shooting at the second flight, which was coming in, which in this story, I'm in the second flight. So now it was quiet, that Vietnam kind of quiet that existed aside from the Huey's roaring jet turbine. The kind of quiet when you recall moments past, wonder if moments. All that morning radio chatter had been intense as everyone on the ground seemed to be searching for some sort of support or backup. As well, we had leveled off to a brief 4-foot hover to drop off the LERP squad we had aboard. These guys were professionals, Johnson thought at the time. They didn't so much look back for a split second. 16s blazing, they were up for the fight. A quick nod from the squad leader as he peeked up from the relative safety of his portable battle station. Set to depart, we were out of there, clearing the trees by inches, it seemed. Holy shit, Johnson had breathed a sigh of relief as we cleared the LZ, the intensities of our morning exercise. So I don't know to what extent I should keep trying to read this, because I know we're kind of starting to run short on time, but I talk a little bit about the aircraft, the people in the third flight, Willis and Ronald, Chalk 3, reported that they were clear of the LZ, and talk a little bit about the experience I went through as a new pilot, and how I was trained by the more senior pilots to be able to handle this job. And I talk a little bit about how I flunked out of college my freshman year and how I wound up here in Vietnam as a helicopter pilot. So I kind of like let my mind travel a little bit, as we always did. I described Johnson. I'd just like to read this last little couple closing paragraphs. Johnson was a lanky guy as well. We all must have been looking back. I don't believe any of us had an ounce of fat on us in that 120-degree heat. And U.S. Army Meals on Wheels program we had subscribed to that year. Sure, there was an occasional company cookout with steaks and free beer for the enlisted guys, but we officers still had to cough up the cash for every meal, even sea rats in the field. And I was explaining that to my wife one time. She had a hard time believing this, but as an officer, we had to actually pay for our meals. So out in the field somewhere at a fire support base, when they were handing out sea rations, there was a guy there collecting money from us to pay for our meals. Just kind of funny. Anyway, Johnson, he had played football in a small Tennessee town, all state, I believe, in '68. But as luck and whatever we still had left of love for country, here he was, volunteered along with about half of his team. Lost track of most of them by now. A couple he knew had died. Fuck it, don't mean nothing, he said. Hell, after this, he said, I'll be tougher than ever and be a walk-on at Tennessee State. You wait and see. And that's the conclusion of the little story that I wrote based on that photograph. So I just a few comments on the organization. It's still a very rough first draft. I have read through it, improved it a little bit, but it needs a lot of changes. I need to define acronyms somewhere along the line. Are my descriptions too wordy? And it's funny about that because I've gone to workshops where people talk about making word paintings and describing every detail of the light socket on the wall, the electric socket on the wall, or the switch plate by the light switch, and just getting into all kinds of detail. And then you'll go to another workshop with someone of equal caliber leading it, and they'll say, don't be wordy, eliminate all that stuff. That's all clutter in your story. And again, mentioned the other writer a minute ago, whose name I just forgot now, but read Hemingway's work, and it's great. It's just very short sentences with hardly even two-syllable words, and I mean it's just very brief and to the point, but it's a great story. So there are two ways to go in this. So essentially, I've got a little over 1,600 words that I took out of this picture. I mentioned proofread and read again. Get someone else to read it over for you. Get someone with no military experience to read it over for you to find out if it's understandable. Get someone with military experience to read it for you to make sure that it's correct. And last but not least, who are your reviewers and who is your target audience, right? Those are very important things. I mentioned that earlier on about knowing who your target audience is, and I'll close on that thought. Having understanding of who your audience is a very important aspect of writing anything. So there you go. How now, brown cow?